Well, hello, I'm Eden Evans, and thank you so much for being here. Today, I'd like to talk about nicotine and cannabis and whether these are just minor drugs in adolescence. Mindful that I'm followed by Joji, who's going to be talking about opioids, and there's no question about that being a minor drug. But what do nicotine and it's going the other way? Yes. What do these products look like today? Today's vapes are disposable, brightly colored, flavored. They're marketed to look fun, cool, sexy. They're marketed particularly to kids. They smell good. Some have digital readouts. They buzz in your pocket if you haven't handled them frequently enough to remind you to use them. They're easily hidden in classrooms. And it's common now for kids to hold the vapor in their lungs for 20 seconds because after that time, if they exhale, it's invisible. This is what they call zeroing a vape or burying the hit. That's the lingo. So they can vape in classrooms without teachers noticing. But what are vapes? They're battery-operated devices that heat liquids to deliver vapor when inhaled. And that vapor can include flavors, nicotine, THC, which is the intoxicating component of cannabis, CBD, which is the not intoxicating component of cannabis, and usually a combination. So I thought it would be fun to do some myth busting today. So myth. Most kids who are vaping are mostly just vaping flavors. And the truth is that kids are mostly vaping flavors and nicotine together. And these are usually highly concentrated nicotine salts. So each of these single brightly colored vapes contains the same nicotine as a pack and a half of cigarettes. Right? And pictured here, the popular Elf bar, it's advertising. Let me see if I can make this work up at the top here. It's advertising that it contains the equivalent of 30 cigarettes. It doesn't like what I'm doing here. All right, maybe I'll leave this alone. All right. So many contain as much as literally 4 packs of cigarettes in a single vape. So a single vape, and there's no way to know what's a dose, right? It's not like a cigarette, you smoke to the end of it and it's finished. It's sort of a continuous use thing. And this new Geek bar that my son just told me about has digital screens, and it contains literally the nicotine in 20 packs of cigarettes in one kind of square container that will fit in your pocket. Now, for sure, vaporized nicotine is less toxic than cigarette smoke. There's no question. But vapor contains harmful ultrafine particles that go deep into your lungs. They contain heavy metals, volatile organics, and usually an addictive product, nicotine and or THC. And they come in like a crazy array of flavors, and the many sort of sweet candy flavors are what kids like. Now, vapes do help some people quit smoking, but they're heavily marketed to kids, and most kids have never smoked cigarettes. So they're not using vapes to quit smoking. They're using vapes as their route to become addicted to nicotine. And so does this matter? Is nicotine like coffee? So it's sort of a minor drug. We're not talking about opioids with fatal overdoses. But what I want to say is that now we know that use of nicotine in adolescence literally increases the addictiveness of other drugs. Right. So it's literally a gateway drug biologically. And what the experiments that have been done have showed that just 2 weeks of exposure to nicotine, only in adolescence, not in adulthood, increases the time, reduces the time it takes to become addicted to cocaine or heroin or opioids. And it happens faster and at a lower dose. And the reverse isn't true. Exposure to cocaine doesn't increase the addictiveness of nicotine. And nobody ever thought that cocaine or opioids need any help being addictive, but this actually lowers the bar. And so when kids who try these vapes in middle school or high school, who later, maybe in college, meet cocaine or opioids, those drugs are going to be more attractive to them, more compelling, more sort of irresistible, basically more addictive. And vapes are increasingly popular. They're hugely popular. In fact, they are the most they were taken up faster than any other drug ever known. They went from non-existent to 25% of 12th graders using on a regular basis within 5 years. Now, thankfully, this has come down a bit since the pandemic. Kids were home, and so that this leveled off. But now we have sort of nicotine pouches, or Zins, you might have heard of, and there are other brands now that are another way to use nicotine. So basically, nicotine vaping is not safe. And to me, the biggest risk of nicotine in my mind is addiction. And I just want to tell a little story about a classmate and teammate of my son's in high school. This was a darling kid. He was a talented athlete. He had charisma, just, pockets of charisma. He was made team captain as a junior, which is unusual. He was funny, not the best student, but he was headed for an athletic scholarship at a superb college because he was so talented. And he started taking vape hits at parties as a junior, sort of skirting the school's pretty strict chem health policies, that if you're caught using drugs, you can't participate in sports. And there's sort of a sliding scale. The first time you miss a week, the second time you miss more, but you're barred from having a leadership. You're barred from being a captain. And so he went from occasional hits with friends to daily vaping, using them in class all through the day. And he was a bit of a jokester. And Henry came home one day from a class they had together, saying that he had been called out for saying something funny but distracting in class. And the teacher told him to move seats. And when he did, a vape pen fell out of his pocket on the floor, seen by everybody, including the teacher. And had that teacher turned him in, he would have forfeited his participation in the upcoming state championships, his captain role in junior year, and most likely his college scholarship. He knew he was taking a chance, but he said, when I talked to him about it, that he kept thinking about them all during the day, that his mind would go to them, just that they would, like, thoughts of them would distract him. And he didn't know that that's actually craving. And he had progressed to addiction. But kids are kids. Kids take risks, and most kids think that they can quit vaping easily. This was a headline in Time magazine back in 2018 at the height of the crisis, of the just vaping becoming just the popularity soaring. So we set out to see if kids are right, if they can easily quit. We enrolled 261 young people, high school and college age kids, who vaped and were willing to try to reduce or quit vaping. And we assigned them to one of three treatments. We had a vaping cessation app, or that app plus vaping cessation sort of behavioral therapy and a placebo, or the app plus the counseling plus a medication, Chantix or varenicline. Now, this study was originally just to compare Chantix or placebo added to behavioral treatment in kind of a usual first-time trial ever for vaping cessation in kids. But because these kids had only used nicotine for a short while, we thought maybe they could quit pretty easily with just behavioral support. So we added that third arm, that app, for just texting support, because it's free, it's available online. And what we found was striking. Neither the counseling nor the texting app were very effective. To our surprise, kids needed a medication to quit vaping. Over half the kids who got the medicine quit, and just 14% of those who got weekly counseling and the app, and just 6% of those who got the app alone quit. So this just came out. The print version will come out this month, actually, in JAMA. And we hope that it changes practice. Because up until now, and even we, a pediatrician, a school counselor will not go reach for a medicine to help a young kid quit vaping. They would give them advice or send them to an app. But here we see that actually most kids will need a medication. So we're starting a vaping cessation trial now in teens, funded by the National Cancer Institute. These kids will be just 14 to 18 years old, and we're hoping that we can identify effective vaping cessation interventions that will actually prevent nicotine addiction and progression, if we start earlier. So that's vaping. Now cannabis. Is cannabis just a minor drug for kids? You've probably all seen some of these cannabis products out there. You might have to look carefully to know if there's cannabis in the product. We put some lookalikes there. And by the way, cannabis and marijuana, those words are sort of interchangeable. So we're talking about marijuana, but I'll tend to say cannabis. Retail cannabis comes in candies, comes mixed with alcohol. It comes in very concentrated forms now that can be really difficult to titrate the dose because it's almost 100% THC, which is again the addictive or psychoactive component in cannabis. Basically, there are just many forms. So how about another myth? Weed is natural, just part of a healthy lifestyle. Is weed safer for my kids than alcohol? I've been asked. In fact, the more often kids use any drug, the worse their mental health symptoms are. And here, in nearly 20,000 Massachusetts school kids that we surveyed in their classrooms, the more frequently they reported using alcohol or cannabis or nicotine, the more frequently they reported they thought of suicide, and the more severe were their symptoms of anxiety, depression, inattention, even psychotic experiences. And the increase in symptom severity was dose-related. So the more frequently they reported using these products, the more severe or the more frequently they had these symptoms. So this was Randy Schuster in our group's fantastic, and she runs this school-wide survey. And Brendan Turbo Clemens, pictured here, was a postdoc with us who was a computational guy. He crashed our servers 3 times, crunching all of this data, which I was like, keep going. This is what we need you to be doing. And what I'll show you is just one example, and maybe I won't try that mouse again, but what this shows is, again, the frequency of going from ever to never to monthly to weekly to daily, how with increased frequency of use of any of these drugs, the more people reported suicidal thinking. So look, 12% of those middle and high school students who never used legal drugs thought of suicide, while 30 to 40% of those who used weekly, so just on the weekends, and over half of those who used daily had suicidal thoughts. And by the time they're using daily, they're often using multiple drugs. So not exactly my idea of part of a healthy lifestyle, right? That's been a very successful sort of marketing ploy. Another myth, legalization of cannabis made it a well-regulated consumer product. We're going to know what's in it, right? Seems like a good idea, and tax it. Unfortunately, unfortunately, that's not what's happened. Most states haven't implemented sort of effective regulatory structures. Contaminants have been reported, and most states don't require testing. So it's still really the Wild West, as you see here. I'm a big skier, so I love that I can show my ski pass and get a $1 joint. Yeah. But we found that what's on the label is often not what's in the cannabis product. So Jody Gilman in our group, fantastic sort of neuroscientist and curious person, set out to study essentially our medical cannabis system in Massachusetts. And here we enroll people who were wanting to try medical cannabis for medical problems, insomnia, pain, anxiety, or depression. And we measured the metabolites in their urine of what they were from what they were taking. And here I just show what was in the urine of people who were using CBD only products. Now, not only was 30% had no CBD in their urine, but lo and behold, 84% had THC in their urine. So they were using a product that was not supposed to cause intoxication, but 84% of them had evidence of that product in their body. And with all of these studies, we ask people every time we meet with them if you had any adverse effects. And often our research coordinators write down quotes. So I'm going to read you a quote from one of the women in our study. Here's what she said when the coordinator asked if anything bad had happened. And usually we're asking about a rash or insomnia, but here's what she said. I was taking what I thought was CBD oil, and apparently it wasn't what I thought it was. I started feeling the effects when I was driving, which was really scary. I got home as quickly as I could. I felt so high, I didn't know where I was and couldn't focus. And the only way I got home was the noises from the GPS. I was paranoid that I might have hit something or someone, but I checked my car and there was no damage. So she wanted to use CBD, which is not intoxicating. The product she bought said CBD on the label, but she got so intoxicated while she was driving that she checked her car for dents afterwards. So regulatory failure, I think, and buyer beware still. So here's some more data on people who are trying to use equal content products and people who are using vaped contents. I'm happy to show this later. But I want to move on to just my last myth, and this is a good one. Cannabis makes you a safer driver. Is a driver who's high a safer driver? It's true that people who are intoxicated with cannabis tend to drive more slowly. That is true. So if you come behind somebody who's going way below the speed limit, give them some room. But they also have slower reaction times, impaired attention. They weave more, so it's called lateral lane deviations, but they weave more, and they're at 3 to 4-fold greater risk for a motor vehicle accident and twice the risk for causing a fatal crash. Many young people are using in their cars because they can't use at home, and smoking weed in a confined space is a fad called hotboxing. So here's a picture of someone hotboxing, and that's thought to intensify a high. That's the sort of the myth. Many people who would never drive drunk, lots of young people, they've got the message, don't drive drunk, but they would drive high. They say that they would drive high. However, being high on cannabis at least doubles your risk for a fatal crash. And because we haven't had an accurate method for determining who's high from cannabis, this doubling estimate is for sure an underestimate. And there's a big disconnect also between how well people think they're driving after using cannabis and how well they drive. In this study, an hour and a half after smoking pot, you can see at 1 hour and a half, the people are the most impaired. That's the dark line, and higher is worse. But most people at that time thought that they were fine to drive, right? That's the light blue line. And that's when people get in their cars and crash. And there's been no way to tell up until now if somebody's actually impaired from cannabis intoxication. A given blood, urine, or breath level of THC does not cause the same a degree of impairment from one person to the next. Like in any one of us, if we increase the amount of THC, our impairment would go up. But a given level of a given concentration in my body would not cause the same intoxication as in many of you. So current methods just measuring THC concentration in breath or urine won't work. And this was the problem described by folks in the district attorney's office in Denver when they called Jody Gilman about a year after recreational cannabis passed in Colorado. They were seeing what they were sure was a bump in driving while impaired from cannabis, but they couldn't prove it. And so we laughed at first, like, okay, thank you for your confidence in us. But they really wanted us to develop a brain imaging technique to be able to tell if somebody was intoxicated or impaired. But then Jody had the idea. She said, what about FNIRS? And I said, what's FNIRS? And it's essentially a way to portably do a brain scan. It's like it works the same way essentially as fMRI, which you've heard of, but it's portable. And with some crucial early support from Leadership Council members Heidi Cox and Matt Bowman, we collected very nice data proving that we really could detect cannabis intoxication with neuroimaging that essentially could be housed within a headband. This led to a couple $1 million from NIH. Steve Willis on the Leadership Council came and joined us, sort of strategizing, and we completed this study that landed us on the front page above the fold of the Globe, and a proposal we're on the cusp right now of getting more NIH funding to build our own device. But here's one of the papers where we show that we could distinguish THC from placebo, but we could critically distinguish THC in those who got high from THC in those who didn't get high. So I don't quite understand all this terribly well myself, but on the left column is the people who got high. And in the right column is people who didn't get high. The red line is THC, and what you see is across 5 different areas of the brain, there's big separation between THC and placebo, but in the people who just in the people who got high. And critically, the specially trained police officers that we hired to be part of this study could not do that. And in fact, their false positive rate, just distinguishing THC from placebo, was over 30%. And that's what we have out there right now, is essentially a field sobriety test. So the other piece is that basically anybody in this study could go home, and a week later, after having no exposure to cannabis, any of those participants would have tested positive on a urine blood test for THC metabolites. And so if they were pulled over, they could have legally been convicted for a DUI despite not having any impairment at all at the time. So we thought we really do need a way to tell in real time if people are impaired. And so this is pictured on this is what we were hoping to build. This was the wired, weird-looking device we used to collect the initial data, but we wanted to be able to build this and house it in sort of a headband. And we will put this on John Herman for the Q&A, so we can see how well his brain is working. But this is the device from a company in Korea who are working with us. Should we not get the NIH funds to build our own, we'll use theirs. And I'll leave you with just some really wonky data, but in the top, you see these are the true positives. The reds are people who are truly impaired, and the ones above the line are the ones that the device picked up were impaired. And here are the people who were not impaired. And you see a few what the device thought were impaired, but most are absolutely not. And this is data with just 200 people. So with AI and 1,000 people, we'll be able to basically bring this false positive to 0, as opposed to what we see now as 30% in the field sobriety test. So I'll leave it there with the tantalizing thought of John wearing this device, so we can see his brain working. And I'm delighted to share the podium with Joji Suzuki.